Hello there friends and welcome! For today's Warhammer Rogue Trader guide we have my very first companion build, Cassia the Navigator. And to put it simply, dear Cassia is pretty much the most overpowered story party member in the game. It's no exaggeration at all. She can do almost everything, starting with her offensive side. Cassia has the easiest time debuffing enemies into infinity, as by just having one of her starting staffs, whenever you apply a navigator power on the enemy, they'll suffer a stacking -5 penalty to all their stats, which is of course further boosted by her very own debuff powers that can easily drain even higher than 100 hit points of the toughest enemies. All you see here is on unfair of course, so that your Cassia will excel no matter what, including at the early levels. But wait, there's more! She is also amazing at dealing damage through her multiple mass area of effect abilities that she can use every single turn, even combining them because she doesn't have much of an attack limit, all the while also moving enemies all around the map to make it easier to target them with your own party members and of course Cassia's powers herself. Even stun locking multiple enemies with her massive area of effect damage plus crowd control ability. And guess what? It doesn't stop there, because Cassia isn't just a goddess offensive-wise, she is also absolutely busted for tanking, with higher hit points than even your main tank, Abelard, everything scaled from her willpower, an extreme amount of dodge to easily avoid most melee and enemy ranged attacks, and even the ability to regenerate extreme amounts of hit points every single turn, even up to a third of her total health. So yes, I'm not sure if it's because of the waifu tax, if you know what I mean, but Cassia is OP just like navigators are supposed to be in the lore. In the end, no other party member does as much as Cassia, especially when unbuffed. So without further ado, let us get into our ultimate Cassia Navigator build. The earliest you can respec Cassia is starting from level 5+, which is rather unfortunate because her first talent, Peak, is spent into something rather useless, an officer talent called Inspire Courage. After all, Cassia is an officer, and while it is one of, if not the best, of the early archetypes, Cassia actually has something even better that she wants to focus on, and this is the general rule when leveling her. You want to skip all of the officer talents by scrolling down and instead going all out on her unique navigator talents that no one else can pick, just Cassia, not even your main character, starting from the course Untraveled and below. Most of them are quite powerful and also part of what makes Cassia such an overpowered character even early. The same for the navigator abilities that you would only get to pick in the same levels you can pick officer ones. So instead of stuff like Air of Authority, despite how good it is, you want to focus on the navigator ones. Also extremely powerful, because Cassia can usually spam multiple ones without attack limitations, all in the same turn, for damage, crowd control, and of course debuffing. Anyways, starting from level 5, you absolutely want to go all out into willpower, so be sure to keep increasing this until you can't anymore. Willpower is Cassia's main stat. It will enhance the power of all of her navigator abilities, even her hit points eventually enough. And as far as a generic talent at level 5, like I said, scroll down because you can also pick navigator exclusive ones at this point. This can go two different ways depending on if you want your Cassia to be more focused into defenses earlier or more offensive power. I'd rather focus into more power because, well, Cassia is already an officer, one of the most busted early archetypes. My main character is also an officer, the same for some mercenaries, and you also have another officer story party member, starting from the second chapter. When you have so many officers, you can easily destroy enemies before they can act, even on unfair, which means defenses don't matter that much. So my preferred pick for her is Mastery of Time. Whenever a creature in combat gains an extra turn, which officers can easily provide, Cassia will get a stacking +5 bonus to willpower until the end of combat. Amusingly enough, officers, by virtue of the Seize the Initiative talent, which we'll be picking very soon, Well, they already start battle with an extra turn, which means, let's say you have 4 or 3 officers. As soon as battle starts, your Cassia will already have a plus 15 or even plus 20 to her willpower. And this will only increase more and more and more as they spam not only their Bring It Down ability, but also their heroic action Finest Hour. What this means is, before your Cassia gets her first important action to use her abilities, her willpower will already have been buffed by an outstanding amount. Which is why I think this is the best pick overall for the first talent. If you want more defenses, however, let's say you don't have many officers, but Cassia herself can already increase her willpower with Seize the Initiative and Bring It Down, well, you can go with first Mind Over Matter, which lets her hit points scale based on willpower. Of course, it also has synergy with Mastery of Time. And for the second talent, soon enough, you can go with Strange Vitality, which lets her regenerate an absurd amount of hit points per turn. Anyways, I'd rather focus into Mastery of Time first, and delay Strange Vitality and Mind Over Matter for later. And as far as level 6, this is actually the only level where I go for an officer talent instead of a navigator power because of how good this specific talent is. As I mentioned before, Seize the Initiative. It not only has amazing synergy with Cassia's Time Mastery for loads of willpower, but well, will let her move and properly position herself as soon as battle starts, even if ambushed. But most importantly, cast Bring It Down essentially for free on another character, let's say your main DPS, so that they get an extra turn as soon as battle starts, which of course also means more Mastery of Time bonuses. What this means is, by just having Mastery over Time and Seize the Initiative, your Cassia is guaranteed at the very least a plus 10 to willpower as soon as battle starts. Besides that, more willpower. Now for the first navigator power or ability, this can also work in 2 different ways. The idea is to eventually get Point of Curiosity because it is one of Cassia's ultimate skills. It hits an absolutely absurd area of effect, only hits enemies with no friendly fire, and well, if they fail a willpower resistance test, they'll be forced to move to the point you select, which of course can damage them. As soon as we get Cassia, the Perilous Ways Navigator talent, the damage would then be equal to her willpower bonus, another reason Mastery of Time is so busted, but also enhanced by +2 for every cell the enemy moves. It's a super easy way of dealing damage with Cassia, especially as you get more powerful abilities like this later. And you can of course select them on the same level, because you get both a navigator power and a talent afterwards. However, Point of Curiosity has requirements, either Notch of Purpose, which is kinda the same but only for one enemy, multiples if they are at the same distance from the cell you choose, except this doesn't have a saving throw at all, or Zone of Fear, which is kinda like Point of Curiosity except on a, well, shorter area of effect, and will make enemies move away from the area instead. And guess what, you can actually use all of them in the same turn because they don't prevent you from attacking. They only cost 1 AP, but of course you won't get all of them at the same time. It will take some levels for that. Anyways, if you want to rush for a Point of Curiosity, then you kinda have to pick either Zone of Fear or Notch of Purpose, depending on what you prefer now. I prefer Zone of Fear because of area of effect, so that you would then get to pick Point of Curiosity around level 12, pretty early in the game as well, chapter 1 still. However, I would rather delay this for later, around level 20 or so, and instead, at this very point, so level 7, go for another Super Buster Navigator power, Waking Nightmare. It also has a decent enough area of effect, but the squares at the edge are kinda separate from each other, so not as easy to hit a very good amount of enemies. Anyways, it only hits enemies, doesn't have a saving throw, only costs 1 AP, doesn't prevent your movement or attacks, and will debuff both the enemy's willpower and toughness for a pretty high amount, equal to -10 plus 2 times your willpower bonus. This of course has dual benefits. First, it can highly damage enemies by sharply reducing their hit points. Let's take this enemy here on Unfair that has close enough to 450 hit points, After all, enemies on unfair do get an 80% boost to that. By simply casting Waking Nightmare, bam, it already lost around 100 hit points, by virtue of having its toughness reduced by such an enormous amount. Definitely worth it. Second, the fact it also reduces the enemy's willpower further debuffs them to be on the receiving end of Cassia's powerful area of effect abilities that of course require a saving throw, especially for easy stun locking enemies through Cassia's very own lidless stare main navigator power. Honestly, because this doesn't have a saving throw, just the hit points drain alone is worth the investment, which is why I prefer it over Point of Curiosity or the other movement skills earlier. But as I said, you can also go for either Zone of Fear or Notch of Purpose now. For another talent at the same level, it's time to pick Eye of Oblivion. With this, at the very start of battle, even before Cassia's turns, all enemies in her line of sight will have both their dodge and also 2-hit chance reduced by -2 times her perception bonus. This talent is part of why Cassia's perception is her second most important stat, but there's other nice stuff, as I'll soon show you, scaling from this. Because the enemies on unfair do get higher bonuses to dodge, around 20%, just this talent alone is like reducing that. Plus of course, the less their 2-hit chance for both melee and ranged attacks, the better for your party. And very soon you'll get another navigator power that makes this even more busted. For the next level, well, as I just said, we want to increase our perception even further through Ebb and Flow. With this, every odd turn, including the first, including even before Cassia's turn comes, will provide her with a +20, that's a massive boost to her perception, which of course means just by combining this with Eye of Oblivion, at the start of battle, enemies will already be debuffed with a -14 to their 2-hit and dodge chances, even higher with the Voice of Command buff from Officer. This benefit doesn't actually stack, but +20 is very powerful. Plus, there's another benefit. Every even level, including the second turn and onwards, Cassia will start with an additional action point. The more action points for Cassia the better, as opposed to pretty much any other character, because she is the one that gets to spam damaging and crowd control abilities the best, as I mentioned before. For the skill boost, well, this can also go 2 different ways. If you don't have anyone else in your party that can specialize in, let's say, Persuasion, then keep increasing it for Cassia. After all, she does start the second level with a boost to Persuasion already chosen that you cannot respec out. Because my Officer party member already specializes in Persuasion, the same for Commerce and Coercion, the other main dialogue skills, I'd rather something different, Lore and Warp. Because I don't have anyone else in my party that can specialize in this, and there are many Lore Warp checks in the game, plus Cassia already comes with a bonus from being a navigator, and it's very thematic for her. So either Lore Warp or Persuasion. For the first upgrade to your finest hour heroic action, the option is very simple, upgrade number 4. With this, during the extra turn, any kills made by the target will also restore 1 action point and 1 movement point, equal to your fellowship bonus. This is what makes DPS characters like Argenta as a sniper become so overwhelmingly powerful, because the normal attack only costs 1 AP, and well, when you are shooting enemies with 100% critical chance, have such high damage and so many attacks per turn because you get to refresh 1 AP per kill, just do the math, right? It really is the one that has the best bang for your buck. Quite OP to be fair. Then I would increase Lore Warp again, as I mentioned before. And for Cassia's second most important stat, because you won't be able to increase willpower anymore to level up until we get our second archetype, be sure to go with Perception, as I mentioned before. Perception is even directly tied to her critical hits chance. It's really good for all her navigator powers. And you can always use more damage. For another talent, I'd say you have 2 options now. You can go for extra defenses with Pass Unscathed, which lets her dodge scale fully based on perception instead of agility. So by just picking this, notice we'll go from 60% dodge to 90%, and it actually goes higher than 100% eventually. As I mentioned, because I go with an Officer Mafia that's all about extra offenses first, I would rather pick something else for more offenses. Undone the Sea of Souls. With this, while under the effect of any navigator power, including our Waking Nightmare ability we picked before, the enemy's armor will be automatically debuffed by -2 times your willpower bonus, increased by the devastating parameter of your staff, and you can always change to a staff with devastating before casting whatever. This can usually result in around -20% to the enemy's armor, which is a huge bonus on unfair because, well, the enemies have higher stats including armor. Plus there is no resistance to this whatsoever. So your Cassia is not only debuffing all their stats, willpower and toughness, but also their armor. Now for more damage you can also go for Tonicity right now, which increases the damage of your navigator powers by +1 for every 5 bonus parameter it has. And navigator staffs can be either castigating, infusing and devastating. The only reason I'm not picking this now is because, well, it appears to be bugged at the moment. It will provide you with higher bonuses than intended, I find. Even at the earliest, it already increases your powers by +4, even if you only have staffs with 5 castigating, which I think should only be a +1. But anyways, you can go with it if you want. Then keep increasing perception. For another navigator power, if you went with Zone of Fear or Notch of Purpose, this is when of course you'll want to pick Point of Curiosity. Because I got Waking Nightmare first, well, this is when I pick Zone of Fear, so we can get Point of Curiosity later, as it is quite powerful. You can of course also go for Notch of Purpose instead, I just prefer the area of effect from Zone of Fear. And for your Navigator talent, well, if you're picking a movement-based one now, like Zone of Fear, well, this is when you want Perilous Ways, because it's what lets your Navigator movement-based powers get damage. Of course, if you picked this before, let's say instead of Waking Nightmare, you would already have picked Perilous Ways at the same level. So something else you can go for now in this case is Blood Augury for even more damage. With this, whenever you inflict damage on the enemies with one of your navigator powers, they'll be debuffed to then suffer an additional 2 times perception bonus percentage extra damage with following attacks. From the navigator, by the way, not allies. For the next level and the next talent, of course another navigator talent, and in my case Blood Augury. After you maxed your Lore Warp out or Persuasion, I would then start increasing awareness. It can help detect traps, secrets and so on for better items. And well, not blowing your party up on traps, of course. Meanwhile, after increasing willpower and perception to the max, well, you might as well increase her fellowship, which has minor synergy with some of the officer abilities. It's just that, as I've explained before, we don't really have the space to pick more officer stuff instead of all the unique navigator talents. Speaking about that, well, now is when I would actually start focusing into the defensive talents for Cassia. First, Mind Over Matter. When you combine this with Mastery of Time, well, you'll have even higher hit points than Abelard, the main party tank. As simple as that. For the second upgrade to Finest Hour, the first, because it also provides characters with extra damage and even the Voice of Command buff permanently, as by default it only lasts for 1 round. Now it is time to pick Cassia's second archetype, and there's really only one way to go in my humble opinion: Grand Strategist. The reason is actually simple, and amusingly enough, it is not because of any of the Grand Strategy's main powers or feats. Rather, the fact that by virtue of just being a Grand Strategist, your Cassia will always, 100% of the time, act first before any enemy. And considering how loaded, how overpowered she is, if she gets to act first, well, you debuff and damage and crowd control the enemies into infinity before they can do anything. And by the way, this will stack with the bonus turn from Seize the Initiative. And just like with Officer, it's the same rule. Instead of picking the Grand Strategist's main abilities or talents, you'll also want even more Navigator stuff, because we still have a lot of good ones to pick. Starting of course with Point of Curiosity at last, but if you pick this earlier, this is when you'd go for Waking Nightmare. For the talent, skip all the grand strategy stuff and more OP Navigator stuff instead. Anyways, this is when I'd go for Strange Vitality for loads and loads and loads of hit points automatically regenerated every turn. Although you can also pick a natural allure to highly increase Cassia's Fellowship. It's just that, as I mentioned, it doesn't have that high synergy with her unless you went all out with officer stuff and the main persuasion, commerce and coercion dialogue skills. As a natural allure, will grant you +5 to Fellowship with an additional +1 for every Navigator talent and or power taken, and well, by this point we have more than enough. I'd rather Strange Vitality now, however. The next level will provide you with another heroic action, this time the Grand Strategist exclusive one. It's nowhere near as good as your Finest Hour Officer one, but because it counts as a separate heroic action and you can only use one per character per battle, you'll also get to combine this with Finest Hour later. Now, level 20 is also very big for Cassia because, regardless of the archetype chosen, you'll get a +1 to her maximum AP. And once again, Cassia excels at spamming multiple powerful abilities per turn, so the more AP you have, the better. Now, resume progression into Willpower, her most important stat. For another talent, another defensive one. At long last, pass unscathed for super high dodge. More willpower. And for another Navigator ability, well, you can go with Notch of Purpose or let's say Zone of Fear, depending on what you picked before, as you already have both Point of Curiosity and Waking Nightmare at this point. But my preferred pick is at long last, a buff, Reveal the Light. This is one of the most busted buffs in the game, especially for Cassia herself, because you can cast it on her. And well, essentially it will provide a huge 4 times your willpower bonus, buff to both willpower and toughness. Toughness doesn't matter for Cassia, but willpower, as I mentioned before, you can always have more and more and more. When you combine this with the Mastery of Time talent you picked super early, well, let's say your Cassia can get even +80 to her willpower, even at chapter 2. It is that good. Why not pick this before? Well, because both Waking Nightmare and Point of Curiosity are really OP. But of course, if you prefer, you can also pick this earlier. Anyways, for more skills, to me Lore Warp, but as I said, there's also Persuasion and so on. For another talent, either Unnatural Allure at this point, and well, we already have the best defensive ones, you can always go for Tonicity as well. Just remember, I do think it's bugged to provide you with more damage than intended, but hey, who doesn't love more damage? Once you can't increase willpower anymore as Grand Strategist, well, just return to Perception. It's the same logic as when leveling up as an officer. And for your Navigator talent, amusingly enough, we are at long last finally running out of the really good ones. But well, there are still some minor ones you can pick, such as the Course Untraveled, which grants you a +2 Perception for every new Navigator power you use. It's just that at most you'll be getting like a +10 or so. It's nowhere near as much as, let's say, the bonus from Ebb and Flow or other stuff you have, which is why I delay it for now. There's also Unnatural Allure, as I mentioned before, or Open to the Warp to debuff enemies with a -10 to their next resistant test against your Navigator power. It is actually the one I would prefer picking for now. As to why I'm delaying this, well, remember we already have Waking Nightmare, which does provide a massive penalty to the enemy's willpower, thus increasing the chances they'll fail the save for all powers, because this only works once. For another talent, as I mentioned, we are running out of really good stuff. But well, you might as well pick the Course Untraveled now. It's a minor bonus, but it can help. Then start increasing more Perception. Lore Warp for me. For the first Take and Hold upgrade, it kinda doesn't matter because by the time you spammed your heroic action from Officer, Finest Hour, well, the enemies will be dead unless you only have a single officer, but at this point you can have 2 already, even if you don't want mercenaries or the main character as one. Anyways, I would just go for Take and Hold upgrade number 4, as to increase the maximum number of action points the characters get during the extra turn this will provide. The more action points, the better for more attacks and powerful abilities. For another talent, you might as well go with a Natural Allure now, or earlier, and then more Fellowship. You can actually go for more Intelligence as well, Once again, it's if you want more lore warp or more persuasion, intimidation, and so on. I'd rather intelligence now. As a matter of fact, you can even start increasing intelligence earlier if you want. It's just that it's only gonna help with lore warp and some minor grand strategies abilities that we are still to pick. More intelligence here for me. And well, back to awareness. For another navigator ability, Notch of Purpose is still good enough. Unless you picked it before, in which case Zone of Fear. Held in my gaze still can work to make enemies stuck in place, but it's only one creature. I don't find it that efficient. For me, it is Notch of Purpose because it's still a great amount of damage for just 1 AP. And well, because we kinda ran out of the best navigator talents at last after picking all of these, you can start getting generic feats or the grand strategist ones. Or go with, let's say, Veil of Protection, which increases your allies' armor when you buff them. It's just that the only buff we have for Cassia currently is Reveal the Light, which she's always going to use on herself anyways afterwards battle is over. While stable routes can decrease Veil degradation the more navigator powers Cassia uses. This is only if you, let's say, are going with Idira, the Unsanctioned Psyker, or if you have a lot of Psyker party members, as she reduces the chances of getting hit with annoying psychic phenomena effects. By the way, Cassia's navigator powers themselves do not increase Veil degradation, that's why they're so good. I would rather just pick a generic talent now, and go for even higher willpower, +5 through characteristic training willpower. As I mentioned, the more willpower, the more OP Cassia becomes. And for another talent, well, +5 extra perception from training, as it is her second most important stat. Then awareness, more intelligence or fellowship depending on what you want. The same again. And well, at this point, something nice you can pick is strategic offense, so that enemies killed in the front line area will increase the bonuses of her combat tactics, and well, Cassia can dump frontline area, then cast her OP navigator powers and kill everything for stacking bonuses. And for another generic talent, at long last you want to pick a normal one, well, besides the characteristic upgrades. And you might as well go with It Will Not Die, so that Cassia's hit points become even more absurdly broken. After all, she already has bonuses equal to her willpower. And for the final Take and Hold upgrade, you can kinda go with anything you want, but I'd like the first for extra dodge, parry and armor to all party members, in the area you select anyways. And my characters besides Cassia and Abelard tend to remain pretty close to each other. And that's it for the second archetype. Now let's cover some extra levels in Exemplar. Honestly, by the time your Cassia reaches this point, she's already a goddess, really. No other words to say it. Exemplar does have a few unique abilities you can pick at certain levels. My preferred pick for Cassia, the earliest, is Malign Influence. With this, whenever the enemy fails a willpower resistance test against your character's abilities, they'll also suffer a huge 2 times your willpower bonus direct damage, which by the way works with pretty much everything you have on Cassia. And at this point, it's already a +20 or so extra damage you're adding, plus the normal damage of the ability anyways. It's really that good. Now as Exemplar, at some thresholds you'll also get to pick either Officer Talents, which she actually has the space for now, or Grand Strategist ones, or whatever you picked as a second archetype. Anyways, Cassia already comes with Inspire Courage, rather poor, but for a much better pick, either more than possible, so Cassia's Bring It Down ability provides more AP during the extra turn, for more attacks of course, and at this point, well, your party members already have a lot of extra abilities that allow them to attack more than one per turn. But if you want your Cassia to be even tankier, go with Blood of Martyrs. You can also instead go with Steel Resolve for a nice +3 to resolve. It's actually what I prefer because the highest Cassia resolve is, especially after being buffed with Voice of Command from a fellow officer, the same for the Air of Authority ability, well, the more momentum she'll generate for your party, and as I mentioned, she can easily kill multiple enemies as area of effect, especially at this point, considering you already have Malign Influence and all the best navigator powers and talents. For even more heroic actions, of course. Then return to Lore Warp, and well, you might as well go for a point of interest to increase the power of your combat areas. Or pick whatever else navigator talent that's remaining. then resume progression into willpower, and for a generic feat, either more intelligence or fellowship, depending on the path you took Cassia, but at this point you might as well pick stable routes. For another navigator power, well, pick either Held in My Gaze for extra damage or Warp Curse Unleashed. By the way, you can also pick this earlier if you prefer. With this, you can choose one target and they'll become cursed to take a lot more damage as Warp, which is the main source of damage from navigators, but even more damage, but less, from other sources. The only reason I don't pick this way earlier is that, well, I think Cassia excels at area of effect damage, and this only works on a single enemy. Whatever enemy is left will be stunned from her lidless stare anyways, so if they survive, it doesn't matter. But hey, we have the space for it now. And of course, you can pick this earlier if you prefer. More lore warp. For another special exemplar talent, be sure to get Eager for Battle. During the first turn of combat, and Cassia always acts before the enemy, she'll get an additional +2 action points. Once again, amazing to spam as many powerful navigator abilities as she can. And honestly, at this point, you can kinda go with whatever else you want, because you're already super busted. For example, Personal Zone, even if the benefit is rather minor, you have the space for it now. Now, as far as gear for Cassia, I want to cover what you'd find the earliest, because I think is what matters the most. Especially weapons, because they really enhance Cassia to the max. The good thing is, the starter navigator staffs, well, you already begin the game with them as Cassia because they drop from the quest you recruit her. Ideally, you almost always want to use the Staff of House Orsilio with Castigating as a property, or others with the same property but higher. With this, whenever the enemies are targeted by any of your navigator powers, crowd control, debuffing damage, doesn't matter, they'll take a -5 stacking penalty to all their characteristics. Once again, the penalty stacks and is renewed every time the same enemy becomes the target of your powers. With this, and let's say the Waking Nightmare ability, you just debuff the enemies into infinity, just like that. So they have less hit points, less chances of resisting your navigator powers, and less melee and ranged skills for less chances of hitting allies. It really is super good. When buffing your allies, however, you'll want a staff that has infusing, so that they also get a +5 or higher bonus to all their stats, which is better left for when we get the Reveal the Light navigator power to buff even Cassia herself. For some other nice options, still in Act 1, try Pioneer's Bracers. Whenever you deal damage, and well, Cassia has Lidless Stare for huge area of effect damage even as early as you recruit her, the target's weapon skill and ballistic skills for less chances of hitting you will be reduced by -5 for 2 rounds, stacking 3 times. Amazing because it enhances our debuffing side even further. Warmonger boots can be nice as well because they do let you keep moving around the battlefield, and for Cassia's powers, as I mentioned before, because they work based on line of sight, sometimes you want to move closer to enemies to hit as many as you can. You might as well also equip the Helmet of the Devoted Protector on her for immunity to critical hits for the first 3 rounds, as she does have the Dogmatic Follower alignment. And for armor, any option that does not reduce her dodge, because like I said, through her perception she can get very high dodge even early. The second chapter also opens up some interesting options, especially the Aquila Pendant for +10 willpower, all specs for +10 awareness, which Cassia can excel at, most importantly, the Expeditionary Footwear. It's, well, to be fair, one of the most busted pieces of gear in the game, OP even. Whenever you use a navigator power, you'll simply get a +50% stacking dodge until the end of the round, considering how many times you can spam your navigator powers per turn. Because they usually only cost 1 AP, well, your dodge will become nonsense really. It reaches insane amounts, higher than 500% even, I'm not even kidding. I actually forgot to mention this, but for Chapter 1 as well, because of how powerful Cassia is, the cornerstone of any party, you might also consider equipping her with the Emergency Injector to automatically revive her once per battle. It's just that She has such high defenses that chances are she won't be dying at all. But hey, it helps just in case. Don't forget, Cassia can also use the Stim consumable to great extent. It costs 1 AP but provides her with, well, 3 AP in exchange. And like I said, the more powers she can spam at once, the better. And well, that's it for our level 40 Cassia build. Trust me, it's more than enough to handle anything the game throws at you on unfair, of course. If you found this guide useful, as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and also consider becoming a channel member if you can. The next build will be all about Argenta as a true sniper queen. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.